Hello, I'm back again with another Single Award Science paper. This time it's the biology and it's the Unit 1 higher tier paper for Single Award. So this is again the specimen paper that CCEA have provided. 1 hour long, 60 minutes for this paper as well. Here we go. So this is, if you've watched the foundation tier paper, you already know this question. Sometimes you get common questions between the two. So the tree preservation orders, or TPO, make it an offence to damage or destroy any protected trees without having first obtained permission from the Department of the Environment. The table shows the number of tree preservation orders in Northern Ireland since 2004. You see 2004 up to 2011 here. And the number of tree preservation orders: 40, 100, 130, 88, 82, 62, 27 and 20. You might have guessed it's a graph, so complete the line graph to show these results on the grid below. So if you got all of the points correctly plotted, you see here how I've done them, that's 2 marks. If you only got 5 correct, so that's 5 out of 7, you get 1 mark. And if you've drawn the line correctly, that's another mark. So a total of 3 marks for your graph. And remember, in biology, we use a pencil and ruler and we draw them up from one point to another. We don't extrapolate between the points. Part 2, calculate the difference in the number of tree preservation orders from 2005 to 2010. So 2005 was 100 and 2010 was 27. So 100 take away 27 is 73. That's for your 2 marks there. 1 showing your calculation and 1 for the correct answer. Then tree preservation orders are an example of how the government tries to protect our environment, suggest another way in which human activity can have a positive effect on the environment. Any one of these, so any one of nature reserves, protecting fish stocks, you could be talking about international treaties, or you could even mention different agricultural practices. Question 2. The graph shows how skin cancer rates in numbers per 100,000 in the UK have changed between 1975 and 2010. So we see the date across the bottom here and the rates per 100,000 up the side. And we've also got females and males. Females are the solid line and males are the dashed line underneath. So state 2 conclusions that can be made from the information provided. And I tried something different here, so I'm not sure it's worked very well, how well you can read it on the screen, but I tried typing it instead of writing it, so bear with me. So 2 conclusions that can be made. The first is the number of people with skin cancer has increased since 1975. Now, this is a separate point here. So if the rate rises in females, it also rises in males. You could also have said that the number of females with skin cancer is always higher than that of males. So you can just see here in 2010, the rate of male and female skin cancers were equal. So any 2 of those would have got you 2 marks in that case. Now, the table below shows how the age of a mother affects the risk of having a Down syndrome child. And again, we're still on common questions here between the foundation and the higher tier. So you'll see the way they are asked is the same, and the answers that they expect are the same. So these are common to both papers. So we've got age of the mother here from 25 to 50, and then the risk of having a child with Down syndrome, you can see, starts off very low, 1 in 1,350, and goes all the way down to 1 in 10 at the age of 50. So it says a test can be carried out to see if a child has Down syndrome before it's born. However, there's a 1% or 1 in 100 risk of miscarriage or loss of baby with this test. So using the information provided, explain fully why this test is normally offered only to mothers over the age of 35 and not mothers aged under 35. So you can see from the table that the risk of Downs actually increases with age, and that means that when you're under 35, the risk of miscarriage exceeds Downs. So up to the age of 35 here, it's only 1 in 350 risk of Down syndrome. But over the age of 35, the risk of Down syndrome exceeds the miscarriage. So it's about a balance of how much you want to take that risk of miscarriage to find out whether the child has Downs or not. Part 2, apart from the risk involved, suggests one factor that may influence a mother's decision whether to take the test or not. So this is where you could talk about, her different religious views, or ethical issues, or her responsibility towards other children, and maybe not wanting to have a dependent child with Down syndrome who might have to rely on the other children after she's gone. She might not want to put that burden on them. Skin cancer and Down syndrome are both caused by a change to genetic material in body cells. Give the name that describes a change to genetic material. Well, that is a mutation. Now for this one, I'm going to just flip to a picture that I took actually of the foundation tier, because it's exactly the same question with exactly the same mark scheme. So it says, describe the stages a newly developed antibiotic will have to go through before it can safely be prescribed by doctors. Your account should include the names of each stage and what's involved, the reasons for each stage, and one ethical issue involved. So you see here I've just written them out, and again it's the same as the foundation tier, so you may already have watched it. But the names of each stage, we have then in vitro testing, we have clinical trials, we have animal testing as well, and then licensing. So you can see those given there. So in vitro testing is about, does the drug work? So that's explaining what it's for. Animal testing is on whole body systems before testing on humans. And the ethical issue comes in there. So people could be opposed to animal testing for ethical reasons. And you just would need to explain what the ethical reason was or why they might be opposed. Then also the idea in there that drugs may have different effects on animals versus humans because they're different species. So then in clinical trials, the drugs are given to humans. And the clinical trials are about seeing if it works or seeing if there are side effects, or deciding what the dose should be. And finally, licensing is the drug is licensed for use when it's shown to be safe, or you could mention that when it has been shown to have fewer side or acceptable levels of side effects or no side effects. Okay, so if you got between 6 and 8 of those points, you would get 5 or 6 marks. Between 3 and 5 is 3 or 4 marks, and 1 to 2 is 1 or 2 marks. And the way it's done is the second mark in each bracket is assessing your written communication skills and the use of specialist scientific terms. So using full sentences to actually write your response, capital letters, full stops, and then scientific terms as appropriate. Okay. So back here and go to the next page. So the graph shows the effect of exercise on heart rates of 3 students. We have student A, B and C, and you can see here what happens to the graph. So A goes up quite high and takes a while to come down. B spikes up and goes down, and then C has a lower rise and comes back much more quickly. So calculate the maximum increase of the heart rate of student A. So we're looking here, it goes from 70 up to 140, so the difference is 70. Then calculate the percentage increase in the heart rate of student A during exercise. So from 70 to 140, it's an increase of 70 here. So that's 100%. Then using the graph above, identify the student who is the fittest. So that would be student C, 1 mark for that. And then your explanation is that their heart rate rises less during exercise, or it returns to normal faster. It's not actually lower to begin with because B's is the lowest at the start, just by about 2 beats per minute. But yeah, so it rises less and returns to normal faster. And it says exercise helps prevent heart disease. Describe and explain. So first part is giving the reason, a description, and then explaining it, how it can affect the wider family. So for example, you could say long periods of time in hospital, so people are off work, and it's usually the parents, so there'd be nobody to look after the children. So that's describing it, like the time of work, and then the explanation of how that impacts the family. So nobody looking after the kids. Now that's just an example. There are lots and lots of correct answers you could give there. And in that situation, they're going to mark anything reasonable correct. Okay. Now we've got one about flower colour in pea plants, which is an inherited trait. It says it's possible for two heterozygous parents that have red petals to have offspring with white petals. Complete the Punnett square to show how two heterozygous red parent plants could have an offspring plant with white petals. And it tells you here use R for the dominant allele and small r for the recessive one. So both are heterozygous, so both have a big R and a small r. Okay, so we've done those both for the father and the mother. And then we're looking at what we get. So two big R's there, big R, and then a large one and a small one. So capital R, small r, the same in this one here. And then in this one, we've got two small r's, so it's little r. So 1 mark for giving the correct gametes. So the gametes, of course, are these. Here, come on pen, here and here. And then 1 mark for filling in the offspring correctly. So that's your 2 marks. Then it says in the Punnett square, circle the genotype of white petals. I'm going to do that in red here once it stops saving itself. So it's just the little r. You have to make sure that you circle it. So that one. Then state the ratio of white petal plants to red petal plants. So you have to make sure you get it the right way around. So I'm looking for white here, which is this one, the little r. So there's one of it. And then the others, there are 3. So it's 1 to 3. If it said red to white, you would say 3 to 1. So just be careful. If it's a ratio, you get it the right way around. Then explain the difference between the following genetic terms. We have gene and allele. So a gene is a section of a chromosome that codes for a certain characteristic. Or you could say it's a section of DNA that codes for a certain characteristic. So 1 mark for that. And then alleles are different forms of the same gene. So now it's very important. Do not say they are 2 different genes, because alleles are 2 forms of the same gene. Next we have dominant and recessive. So the best way to describe dominant is to say a dominant allele is expressed if the genotype is heterozygous, and then a recessive allele is only expressed if the genotype is homozygous. And we're back to 1 mark there for each one. So 1 for dominant and 1 for recessive. Now we're on to the menstrual cycle, and you see this type of diagram that you'll be familiar with in your notes. And on it, they have said that in this section from 1 to 5 days is menstruation, so that's the period. And then these are the days when sexual intercourse could lead to pregnancy. And on the inside here, we have ovulation, and that's just these 3 days. Okay. So use the information to calculate the percentage of days in the cycle that can lead to pregnancy. So this section here, which when you count it is from 11 to 17, which is 7 days, out of the total of 28 days, so 7 divided by 28 times 100 is 25%. 7 is a quarter of 28, so it's 25%. 1 mark for showing how you worked it out, and 1 mark for getting the right answer. And it says the menstrual cycle is controlled by the hormones estrogen and progesterone. Describe fully what a hormone is. So for this, you'll see I've circled some of it. The entire answer is it's a chemical messenger that travels in the blood to a target organ. Now, if you said all 3 of those words which are circled, or the phrases which are circled, you got 2 marks. Only 2 of them, you got 1 mark. So if you just said it's a chemical messenger that travels in the blood, that was just 1 mark. If you said to a target organ, that is both marks. So then the role of estrogen is to stimulate ovulation. Use the diagram to suggest which day the level of estrogen is likely to be at its highest. So I've written here 12, 13 or 14, and if we just go back to the diagram here, you'll see that that is when it says ovulation is happening. So 12 or, yeah. Okay. Then describe fully the function of progesterone in the menstrual cycle. So it maintains the lining of the uterus. And that's the first part of the answer, in preparation for pregnancy. So once ovulation happens, progesterone is maintaining that lining of the uterus in case there's an implantation of a fertilized egg. Part 4, describe fully how the female contraceptive pill prevents pregnancy. So you need to be talking about how it changes the levels of hormones in the body, and that either stops an ovum or an egg developing or stops ovulation, and 1 mark for each of those points. 7a, part 1, what are stem cells? Well, again, if you remember, if you've seen the foundation tier, you'll see that you were able just to select the words from the ones in bold, but in the higher tier they're asking you to actually write it out yourself. So they are simple cells that can divide to form cells of the same type. So that's your 2 marks, simple cells, and then divide to form cells of the same type. Suggest 1 potential benefit and 1 potential risk for patients receiving stem cell treatments. Again, this is, you could have had a huge number of things here, but benefit could be there's a potential to treat incurable conditions, or you could say that it's a very pioneering treatment. In other words, it's very cutting edge, or you could say, like, name something that it's used to treat, like leukemia. And then there are risks. You'd be talking about ethical issues there, any of those that you've discussed in class, the transfer of viruses, which can happen, or the formation of tumours, which can happen. So 1 method of obtaining stem cells for use by scientists is harvesting from human embryos. Suggest 1 reason why some people do not approve of using this method. It's because there could be damage to or destruction of an embryo, or you could say that it could be against someone's religious beliefs. Number 8, 1 communication system in animals is the nervous system. Name the 2 parts that make up the central nervous system, or the CNS. So you need both of these. There's only 1 mark for both of them, and that's the brain and the spinal cord. Then it tells you the CNS controls and coordinates actions between receptors and other structures which bring about responses in the body. Name the structures that bring about responses. So it's muscles. And B, an investigation was carried out into how the diameter of nerve cells or neurons affects the speed of nerve impulses in different animals. The results are shown in the graph. So just make it a little bit bigger here. We've got the diameter of the nerve cell in arbitrary units, going from 10 to 100 here, and the speed of the impulses on the y-axis going from 0 to 8. And you'll see that there's a linear relationship on the graph there. So it says, using the graph above, describe the relationship between the diameter of nerve cells and the speed of nerve impulses. So in this type of answer, you want to be mentioning both variables. So I've said, as the diameter of the nerve cell increases, the speed of the impulse increases. So you're hitting both the variables in there and explaining the relationship between them. Part 2, animal A has nerve cells that have a speed of impulse of 3 meters per second. B has nerve cells that have a speed of impulse of 4.6 meters per second. Using this information and the graph in the previous page, calculate the difference in diameter of the nerve cells in the 2 animals. So the 2 numbers are 3 and 4.6. So at 3 here, let me go across to the graph and down, which gives us 40, and 4.6 is here, and let me go down to 64. So 64, take away 40 gives you the difference, which is 24. And 1 mark for each there. 1 mark for just showing the numbers that you're using, and 1 for the answer, which in this case was 24. So the other communication system in animals is the hormonal system. How does the speed of the hormonal response compare with the speed of the nerve impulses? So you need to be saying that the hormonal response is slower than nerve impulses. And don't just say it is slower or slower, say it's slower than nerve impulses. Now we're on to one about peppered moths, and it says the peppered moth exists in two genetically distinct forms, the light and dark variety as shown in the following diagram. Both types of moths spend a lot of time resting on tree trunks where they are prone to being eaten by birds. The table shows the percentage of moths of each variety in the regions of England in 1950. So it says in Dorset, there are 96 of the light variety and 4 of the dark variety. In Manchester, 9 of the light ones and 91 of the dark ones. So in highly industrialised Manchester, the trees were blackened due to smoke or soot pollution in 1950, whereas there was little pollution in more rural Dorset. So describe and explain the results in the table. So Dorset, you can see, has more of the light variety. So I've written that. Dorset is mainly light and Manchester is mainly dark. So that's my first point. So there's 3 marks here and that's the first point. So that's describing the results. And then explain. So you're going to make an appropriate reference to the camouflage. So what that means, and sometimes you'll see that in the mark scheme and not be sure what it means. It means the black moth here is going to be really well camouflaged against the sooty trees, buildings in Manchester, where in Dorset there's no soot. So the white one is going to be better camouflaged against the tree trunk, okay? And then a link between colour and predation. That means the ones which are better hidden are less likely to be eaten. So in Manchester, there are more dark ones because they are better camouflaged, so birds can't see them to eat them, and vice versa with the ones in Dorset. And finally, it says since 1950, government legislation has reduced the amount of soot pollution throughout the UK. Suggest how this may have changed the numbers of peppered moths in each region and explain your answer. So, the number of dark moths would decrease, and that's because the lighter variety are better adapted for all the areas. In other words, as the soot decreases, there's less camouflage for the dark moths, so they get eaten more, and the lighter ones are better adapted to survive. Then explain fully what's meant by the term evolution. So we're looking just for 2 things: the change in a species over time. Very simple definition. Make sure you learn that one because it does come up quite frequently. And then the phenotypes of the peppered moth show discontinuous variation. Phenotype, of course, is the physical appearance. So it says describe what is meant by discontinuous variation. And what you're going to say there is something about groups. So I've said it's easy to separate the individuals into groups with discontinuous variation. So that's the end of the higher tier specimen paper for Single Award Biology. Please have a look at some of the other papers that I've done. And, well, thanks for watching.